I'm Louisa Lim. I wrote The People's Republic of Amnesia, Tiananmen Revisited, and I was based in China as a foreign correspondent for a decade, first for the BBC and then for NPR. I really looked at the way in which China, the Chinese government and the Communist Party has tried to wipe out the memories of June the 4th, 1989. And the various mechanisms they used. So what happened in the initial aftermath was that they tried to fill the information space. They put out a great deal of propaganda telling their side of the story. But then over the years, this really disappeared from the shelves. And now if you went to a bookstore to try and buy something about June the 4th, there would be nothing. You never hear it spoken about. It's not taught in schools. The internet is censored, so it cannot be written about. Well, in my book, I really argue that amnesia is not just something that's imposed from the top down. It's something that people have really cooperated in. They've been co-opted into this silence, and people have done that because they feel that there are very major costs to remembering June the 4th. And as they grow older, they want to protect their families, and they want to be sure that their children can survive and thrive. So even people who were involved in the protests, they would often not tell their children what happened. People who were injured sometimes in the protests will make up stories to hide the truth from their children because the cost of memory is now perceived to be so great that nobody wants to do it. I start the book with Chen Guang, who at the time was a 17-year-old soldier, and his unit was brought in from the provinces to be one of the martial law troops, one of the units that was sent in to put down the protests in Tiananmen Square, to clear the square at all costs. And his story was particularly interesting because I just felt it wasn't a story that had been told before. He was very, very conflicted, and he still is for many years, about the role that he's played in all of this, but he still keeps the souvenirs that the army gave them because all of the martial law troops that took part in this were given a commemorative watch, with a small watch with a picture of Tiananmen Gate. They were given medals, and to us it's extraordinary, a souvenir of a killing, souvenir of a crackdown, but it's an important part of his history. So another person who I profile is Zhang Xianling, who is one of the co-founders of the Tiananmen Mothers, which is a group that she set up with Ding Zilin, who's almost like the public face of the group. And it's a group of relatives of those who were killed in 1989. And Zhang Xianling lost her son, who sneaked out that night to take photos and was killed with a bullet to the head. This experience led her and Ding Zilin to start tracking down other relatives, and they've become really China's first political lobbying group. Every year they write open letters to the government lobbying for accountability, compensation and justice. I mean, how it will be remembered in future within China is a really big question, especially when the collective amnesia is so great, especially amongst people under 30 who were very, very young children or not even born in 89. I think there's some people who simply have no idea. I was in Chengdu on a story for NPR, and I just happened to meet this woman, Tang Deying, and she told me about how she had lost her son in Chengdu in the crackdown in 1989 in Chengdu, and I was really surprised because I hadn't really known that there had been one. I was, quite surprised with what I discovered, that there had been this enormous demonstrations, as all over the country, but there'd also been a hunger strike in Chengdu, and how on June the 4th in Chengdu they had cleared the square, but then people had come back out on the streets again, this time to protest against the brutality in Beijing. I thought this was very important to tell because I think we have a very Beijing-centric view of what happened. But the other astonishing thing was, to me, that this could have happened, that so many people had demonstrated, so many people had witnessed the various rounds of brutality and, almost pitched battles in the streets between protesters and the People's Armed Police. and that this had been completely lost to history. It was, to me, a perfect case study of memory eradication. I think in China today, it is a very mainstream view that the government did what it had to do in 1989, and that act has allowed China to become the China that we see today, the second richest country in the world, a country that has pulled hundreds of millions of people out of China. So a country that has pulled hundreds of millions of people out of poverty. And I think this is really a retrospective justification for the government's actions based on these 3 decades of economic growth. People see how their lives have improved. They are grateful to the government for having much better lives than their parents or grandparents. And they really believe that there was no other way. For a population that was very traumatized by the Cultural Revolution and the chaos then, I think the idea of bringing order was a very powerful and very attractive idea, and I think this has meant that this view has become very mainstream. And even amongst some people who took part in the protests in '89, they will now say that they believe the government did the right thing. What happened in 1989 in China really matters, and it matters because history matters. And history matters to the Chinese government a great deal. That is why they spend all this time and all this money and all this manpower suppressing discussion of 1989. It is very important inside China. It's very important also from a policy standpoint, because what happened then really set the path for the China that we see today. What I would really like is I would like this book to be translated into Chinese so that people who live in China or people who don't speak English have access to it, just so that they can read it and have a better understanding of their own history.